Right, we interrupt that particular story. It's not the correct one. We apologize for that. But let's bring you this now. The ANC recently shared its list of nominees for portfolio committees in Parliament. Some opposition parties have raised concerns about individuals implicated in corruption and these individuals being appointed to these oversight roles. Well, we're joined now from Cape Town by the DA's Chief Whip in Parliament, John Steenhuisen, and we'll also be joined in this conversation by Ben Turok, who is an ANC stalwart and a former MP himself. But first, let's talk to Mr. Steenhuisen. John, good morning to you. So the House committee chairpersons are being elected today, and of course, some of the names there is that of Cedric Frolik, who returns to the position of chair of chairs. Just very briefly, explain to us in plain language the role of the person who is heading up this particular position.
Well, obviously what the House chairs are responsible for doing is presiding over meetings of the House. They also allocated specific functions. In this case, the person you're referring to is in charge of committees and ICT in Parliament, and will be heading up that particular portfolio amongst presiding officers. And as you know, they're then also able to preside over meetings of the House and issue discipline within Parliament.
Now, let's focus on Mr. Frolik for a bit, because he obviously is a controversial figure. So he is alleged to have been used by Bosasa, and to use Angelo Agriti's words, quote unquote, to cross the impasse between bosses of his controversial or former controversial company, Bosasa, and the then Correctional Services Portfolio Committee chairperson, Vincent Smith. Is this someone that can be trusted?
Well, obviously there's a major concern around whether we are electing the right people to particularly preside over the investigations and the rooting out of state capture here in Parliament. But he certainly doesn't stand alone. I think if one also looks at a variety of the names of individuals who've been put forward to be proposed committee chairs, people like Faith Mutambi, Mosebenzi Zwane, Bongani Bongo, these are all people who have been at the heart of the state capture project in South Africa, some of whom served in the Zuma cabinet. Obviously what Parliament needs to do is to be beyond reproach. It can't be the House that exercises oversight and accountability and yet has compromised individuals who themselves then occupy key positions in that House. And obviously it also makes it very difficult for President Ramaphosa's cleaning up and cleaning out initiative if the very same faces who dominated the state capture project over the course of the last decade are now still sitting in the pound seats and in leadership positions here in Parliament.
Mr. Steenhuisen, how easy or difficult is it to work with a person of that nature in these parliamentary committees? These are multi-party committees, so you as opposition MPs are able to clearly see something when something is amiss.
Well, obviously the big concern here is that what these individuals are going to do chairing these committees is head off any aspects of the fight against state capture. It's not in their personal interests to pursue state capture, to pursue those involved, because these individuals who themselves are implicated. So I think what you're going to see is them, instead of acting without fear and favour, instead of them acting to defend the Constitution, instead of them acting to represent the people of the Republic of South Africa, they're going to use these positions to cover their own backs, to cover those who are implicated themselves and who can implicate them further, and it's going to become one big protection racket. It's entirely inappropriate for these people to be put forward as committee chairs here in Parliament. It is a slap in the face against the fight against corruption and maladministration, and it really does make President Ramaphosa's clean up and clean out campaign ring hollow. How do you take it seriously now when the very architects of state capture are the ones going to be sitting in committees trying to clean up state capture?
Well, Mr. Steenhuisen, let's pause there for a second and try and bring into the conversation Professor Ben Turok. Mr. Turok, if you can hear me, clearly here I'm in conversation with the DA's Chief Whip as well, John Steenhuisen. Talk to me about your impressions of these people who are nominated to these positions. Today, we're going to have the official election of the chair of chairs, for example. That's Cedric Froelich. Allegations against him. Yes, he's not been convicted of those in any court of law. That still allows him to go to Parliament. But importantly, the question here is, can he be trusted? And what does that say about this sixth administration or sixth Parliament?
Well, let me say firstly that there is something to be reassured about, and that is that we have people in the Speaker and the Deputy Speaker who are very experienced and are, if you like, a pillar of stability in Parliament. I happen to know Cedric Froelich very well from when I was in Parliament, and I must say, in those days, I trusted him and I thought he was a decent person. It seems that some things went wrong with Posasa. I don't know the details, but I do know that Froelich is quite a steady kind of person, and maybe he will do a decent job after all. But the key thing seems to me is that there are clearly some people in the ANC, in the Thule House, who want to capture Parliament and who've been maneuvering to place chairs who are sometimes disreputable in important positions in order to capture Parliament. But in my experience, and it's 20 years of experience, it's not so easy. Because a chair is not all that powerful. A chair of a portfolio committee depends on a degree of cooperation, otherwise the committee can't function. Indeed, the whole of Parliament, notwithstanding all the rows and the fighting, the whole of Parliament depends on a minimum degree of cooperation between all the parties. If no cooperation is possible, then Parliament cannot function. And the same is true of portfolio committees. So even if a chair is catapulted in, is catapulted in from the Thule House, and if that chair thinks that he or she is going to get their own way in a portfolio committee without any hindrance, that is quite mistaken. Because what happens in the portfolio committee is that if the chair is unreasonable or too dogmatic or trying to push a Thule House agenda against the will of the committee members, all of them, then what happens is that committee members walk out, committee members break the quorum, and that means that the committee can't function. And I have seen on quite a few occasions where an ANC chair of a committee who was a little bit too dogmatic and too pushy found that the opposition had walked out or refused to vote or refused to participate, which means that the quorum is broken and it means that the committee can't function. And therefore the chair is isolated and useless.
Professor
No
Turok,
chair can afford to do that.
Prof, can I interrupt you there for a second? In the interest of time, I just want to ask you this quick question before I revert to John, and that is, what is the process involved in removing a committee chairperson? Because many of the people that are coming in are implicated in all manner of wrongdoing. What is the process involved in removing such a person from a particular portfolio committee?
Well, it depends on the chief whip, but ultimately the decision is the Thule House. Because the Thule House has a deployment committee, normally chaired by the deputy president. And that deployment committee is in charge of deployments, as they call it. And a decision on whether a committee chair is removed or not ultimately goes to that committee. So it is an ANC decision.
All right, Professor Turok, I'm going to have to let you go, but thank you very much for affording us your time. Let me go back to John Steenhuisen. John, Yes, you're still there. Thank you very much for staying on. So the incident, though, I just want to go back to your party, matters that are very internal to the DA. Your party, there's a race incident involving your MP, Phumzile van Dam. This is causing tension again in the DA, and very publicly so, with Helen Zille having entered the fray there. What's your party's position on this matter?
Well, obviously, we're looking into the incident, and we will pronounce on it at a later stage. There is an investigation underway, and obviously, we're trying to deal with the matter as quickly and as effectively as possible. I don't think it's good to have members of Parliament squabbling on Twitter. I don't think it's good to have members of the party not speaking to issues that matter most to voters. But certainly, if one looks at the gravity of the situation we're facing here in Parliament with these committee chairs that are about to be elected, I think it makes that sort of incident, frankly, pale into insignificance. And I disagree fundamentally with Professor Turek that committee chairs are not powerful. We saw, for instance, that it nearly took a full year for us to replace a committee chair of the Home Affairs Committee, Lemias Mashile, who simply refused to initiate an investigation into the Gupta naturalisation and blocked it. We saw how committee chairs in the Nkandla investigation completely stonewalled and blocked any form of accountability. So I think that Professor Turek's assertion that these committee chairs are benign characters that can be moved around rather easily is frankly not borne out the reality, and perhaps he's been out of the arena here in Parliament a little bit too long to not understand the real politic of what is happening here in Parliament and the exercise of power that Luthuli House is putting here on these committee chairs.
Just two very quick questions, John, before I let you go. We are out of time. Your party has called for a probe into the fitness of the Public Protector, Bosisiwe Mkhwebane. How soon do you expect that to get underway with these committee chairpersons now soon to be elected into their positions?
Thanks, Molly. Well, as you know, yes, we have lodged a complaint against the Public Protector and asked for an inquiry into her fitness to hold office. The Justice Committee will be established in the week of the 2nd to the 5th of July, and we hope that it'll be the first order of business for them to attend to. I think it's very, very important that the committee performs its duty in terms of both the Constitution and the Public Protector Act, to hold the Public Protector accountable, particularly on the back of a number of scathing judgments which have been set aside, deemed unconstitutional, and have seriously called into question the competence of the Public Protector to continue in her position.
Her probe into the President's Bosasa debacle is increasingly becoming politicized. Will you take her findings and recommendations as pure?
Well, obviously what you have to do is look at the basis of the finding and whether it's sound in law and whether the procedures that have been followed. What you can't do is simply write off the office of the Public Protector just because you have an individual in the office that is not suitable. It is a constitutional creation of Chapter 9 of the Constitution, and frankly is the only avenue in terms of the Executive Ethics Act where complaints against members of Parliament, ministers and the executive who deliberately mislead the legislature to which they're accountable. It is the only legal mechanism available to seek recourse for that, and obviously we have used that mechanism to hold the President accountable for the comments which we believe were misleading that were made around the Bosasa matter in the answer to a parliamentary question.
John Steenhuisen, thank you very much for your time. He is the DA's Chief Whip at the National Parliament. Also, my thanks to Professor Ben Turek.